Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I'm Frank Parker. I'm on the school committee. This is the last of the 4 finalists to visit the district. From my standpoint, where I was the chaperone for 3 out of 4 of them, it's been quite an informative experience. In fact, this whole superintendent search, from my standpoint, has been a learning process, and it's been eye-opening for me. So today, to visit Everett was Thomas Flanagan. He's the Chief Academic Officer, Providence Public Schools. And questions and answers, and welcome Everett High.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parker. I really appreciate spending time with you today, Mr. Parker, and getting to see all the schools. We had a great day today. Started off at the high school right here, and there were a couple students who were waiting at the door. And not for us. They weren't greeting us. There was a group coming in from another district to talk. But we got a really nice warm greeting from a group of students, and I asked that group of students what the best thing about Everett was and about the schools in Everett and their experience. And they, without pause, one student in particular, but everyone concurred, they said the teachers. So what a great way to enter a beautiful building on a rainy morning, and to hear from students about how much they value the adults that spend time with them each and every day. So I want to thank you all for the service that you do here in Everett, and I also want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to spend a little time with you here this afternoon. So as Mr. Parker said, I'm Tom Flanagan. I'm the Chief Academic Officer in Providence Public Schools. I actually grew up in Washington, D.C., in a neighborhood where a lot of families were coming in from El Salvador, and it was an African-American neighborhood historically. And so I had the wonderful opportunity of being able to grow up in a really diverse neighborhood and to really learn about the importance of education, because I went to school on a different on a different side of town, and I learned from that experience that my friends who lived in Mount Pleasant had a very different experience than my friends who went to the school that I went to. And it really instilled in me the importance of education. And I also come from a family of educators. My step-grandfather was the superintendent of schools in Westchester County, Tony Sabella, and I aspire to be like him one day. So I hope to sort of follow in his footsteps and work with the community to lead a district forward. I was a teacher for 10 years. I taught social studies, history, special education. I was a special education coordinator, a principal, an assistant principal, a principal. Then I moved into central office administration, and I oversaw special education for the District of Columbia Public Schools. So that was 111 schools, and we had programs in each of those 111 schools. And then I moved up to Providence. We were interested, my family and I, my wife and my 3 young children. I have a 10-year-old and twin 6-year-olds, all girls, who we were interested in moving. So we started looking for opportunities in different places, and I was really excited about the opportunity in Providence because it gave me a scope that I didn't have in Washington, D.C. In Washington, I had programs in all of the schools, but my focus was kind of narrow in some ways, and I wanted a broader scope. So to be able to sit right beside a superintendent and see the working of the entire district was really something that I was looking forward to, and I've really enjoyed my experience in Providence. I'm happy to take questions about Providence as well because it's currently in an intervention with the state, and so there's a lot of work happening there that I support. But it also is a time for me when this started to happen and the previous superintendent decided to leave, to think about what other opportunities are out there, and I, as I said earlier, aspire to be a superintendent, and so I was interested in superintendencies, and I started looking, and I found Everett, and I was really taken by what I was just seeing. I'm obviously just reading on the web and sort of learning more about the district, and as I applied and started to get an initial interview, I started seeing I started looking at the school board meetings, and I saw a meeting where Senator Domenico came in and talked about the funding formula and his work on the funding formula. And I thought, wow, to have a state senator coming in to support equitable funding in a district is such an amazing thing to have. And then I read, and now the Opportunity Act is there. And so it'll be really exciting to see what a school district that already has so many important pieces in place can do when there's an infusion of funds. And then I also read the Opportunity Atlas, which is a study that shows that Everett, along with a couple of other nearby towns, are showing outsized, young people who grow up in Everett have really strong, do really well compared to sort of the national average. And so for me, the theme of my time here is opportunity. There's, whether it's me or someone else, there's such opportunity in Everett, and I personally hope to be a part of that. So for me, I would focus on shared responsibility, I would focus on equity and excellence, and I would focus on family and community partnership. And obviously, I would be learning about the community and build plans with the community, with you all, as I moved, as we work together if I were to come here. So at that, I'll leave it open for questions.
So if you get a question, come to the mic.
There are many management styles. What is your style? Can you talk about your management style?
Sure. I believe in distributing leadership or shared leadership. I believe it's very important to build systems so that multiple people in an organization have opportunities for leadership. And to me, leadership starts with teachers in classrooms. I believe teaching is a leadership position. And you could also say it begins with students in classrooms. But I just see teachers as such an important agent of change and such an important group of people to empower, to be able to make decisions, to be able to rise up concerns, to be able to be a part of decision-making that's happening at the school and at the district level. And that's work that I've done in the positions that I've been in. As a principal, I always developed all my school improvement planning, school improvement plans. My strategic plans were always done alongside teachers. The school culture plans, all of that, I believe that people, as humans, we implement on things that we have investment in and that we see value in and that we have participated in developing. And so for me, it's about sharing leadership and distributing that leadership across an organization. And that's my philosophy for leadership. Thank you.
So I have been asking similar questions to all the candidates.
Okay.
So this is sort of a modified version of one question I've asked the candidates. If you become the superintendent of the Everett Public Schools, you'll be the first. You'll be replacing an individual who was a superintendent for 30 years.
Yes.
In this district. There are some people in the district, particularly on the administrative level, who are anxious about the fact that an outsider is going to come in and take the reins of the district, right? And so it's obviously going to be a new experience for everyone. You know, they're concerned, right, about your management style. What do you plan to do when you come in? Sure. You were asked a question earlier today about how, you know, would you bring in an outside team or not? I think it'd be good for everyone to hear. Sure. What you said. But there's one part of this question. So there's two parts. One, you're a newcomer. You're an outsider. Right. How would you allay the anxieties that some people may have about that? That's part one. Part two. You know, being a superintendent of a public education of a district means that you're also going to have to be an advocate for the public schools. Yes. With the other stakeholders in this city, the mayor, the city council, and the school committee. And Everett, like many communities, you know, it has its own political culture. So that's another part of your job. It's not just curriculum and you know, distributive leadership. Sure. It's how are you going to deal with that public aspect to get the funds that you want, get the support. So first the anxiety that people feel, and then how are you going to deal with the mayor, the city council, the school committee? Yeah,
so I get the anxiety, and this happens when there are transitions, even when there are internal people moving into roles of leadership. So I understand it. I actually feel it right now. I'm currently in that situation and have been in that situation in the past. And for me, I have never come to a new position in leadership and brought anyone with me. I don't believe in bringing a team of people. I don't believe in bringing people with me. I believe that there are strong people. I believe in people. I believe in their ability to. I believe that people are in this work for the right reasons, and that that we can work together to create change. And I don't think it means you need to bring new people to do that. And so I think what I would do is right away I would build relationships. So I would be conscious about talking to people about my goals, and then develop, and part of that would be about developing shared goals for the district. So I would start with a 100-day plan that really clearly spelled out some specific measurable targets that I would want you all to hold me accountable to. So they would be things like having a certain number of town hall meetings, a certain number of living room meetings with families in the community, a certain number of a meeting with faculty at each school, a certain number of sort of classroom observations or walks, learning walks with administrators. So I would try to signal my intentions both in the actions and in the plans that I'm creating, and then also be really clear with people. I believe in the leadership in Everett, and I don't believe that it makes sense to bring people from another place and to bring a team. I just don't feel like that's just not in me, and I don't believe that's not how I lead. So I would want to just communicate that, and then I think people start to trust. I mean, I think the biggest thing for someone coming from outside is there are issues of trust, right? So how do we know who this person is, and are they going to act on their intent and on their statements with integrity? And then that's just acting, walking the walk, making sure that what you do is what you said you're going to do. And I feel very strongly about being very clear about what we can accomplish together, and then being very, and then kind of reflecting back on that and making sure that that's clear with everybody, and living that. So I think there's a lot of work with trust building, and for me, trust building is acting as you say you're going to do, and it's also being very conscious about meeting people and learning about the strengths of the district, and learning about all the different things that people either are proud of or want to see changed. And I heard a lot of that today, a lot of passion around the work that's happening, a lot of passion for the schools and the community and the students and the people, and that was so powerful to me. And so I would want to just continue to feed off of that and continue to build that by building trust between central office and schools. And your second question.
I apologize. I shouldn't have asked two questions.
That's okay. That's okay.
About dealing with the mayor, the city council.
Right.
For the public schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of the role of the superintendent is to communicate the message. So we would need to develop the message together, develop our plan with the school committee, with teachers, with leaders, and use that distributive leadership style to build a plan that we then can tie back to other people in positions that are not in the school department, but City Hall, City Council, right? The folks that can help us make our goals happen. We would not be able to do what we could without the support of Mayor DiMaria and the mayor, the City Hall and City Council. We would have to work together to make that happen. And I know collaboration is a big thing that people have asked me about in every forum that I've been in, and I kind of don't mention it that much because it's just is what I would assume that we would do, right? We have to work together. They're funding us as a district. They need to know that they're putting their money toward something that is beneficial for the students and the residents of Everett. And so I would want to make sure that we had a clear plan with clear measurables, and that then my work would be to communicate that. And I think we could collectively communicate it, but I can sort of be the lead in communication. And so I've had to do that in Providence. We had a mayoral appointed school board, and so the superintendent reports to the mayor, but also to a school board. And part of the state intervention in Providence is that is no longer the setup. But we've worked really closely with the mayor's office on a number of different initiatives, like expanding pre-K, expanding summer learning opportunities, starting to think about facilities improvements. And we wouldn't have been able to do any of that without that collaboration. And so for me, it's setting up regular times where we have space to talk and to plan and to work together, because I think that also starts to build trust. The more you sit together and work together, innately builds trust. So that's how I would go. Thank you.
As superintendent, if you want to implement policy that would have an impact in the classroom or even district-wide, how would you go about to implement anything?
Yeah. So I would start by defining the problem so that I believe that we have to work with urgency. But I think we cannot work in a hurry. And I think you get into, when you're making quick decisions without bringing people together to make those decisions, that's just hurrying. And that's, I think, sloppy. So I think we work with urgency each and every day in the classrooms, in schools. We're working with urgency to make sure that students are as successful as they can possibly be with us. But we can't work in a hurry, right? So if you work in a hurry, then you make sort of proclamations. We're going to do this policy, and now this policy, and now this policy. And what I've seen with that is, and I have seen that as an assistant principal in DC public schools. We had central office come in one year and say, in November, they came into our schools and said, you're going to use this reading program now. And they did an hour-long professional development on using this reading program. They had brought all the boxes in. We never saw them again, and no one ever implemented the reading program. So that's kind of hurrying, right? And making decisions that don't make sense, and there's not follow through, and then they don't get implemented because the people don't understand why, and they're not invested in and engaged in the process. So I would want to make sure that there were multiple forums for conversation around what's working and what's not working, and then be clear about the types of policy decisions or the types of initiatives that we would need to do to address those things. And I would start with the strategic plan. So I'm big on strategic plan and project management 3 years out, 4 years out. I think the strategic planning process in Massachusetts, there's a 3-year process, maybe it's a 4-year process. So I would use that strategic planning and school improvement process and utilize that to create a strategic plan that had input from families, from community members, from teachers, from students, from central administration, from the city. I would want to develop a strategic plan that we all felt we were behind. And then you're not making a rash decision policy change, right? We're saying these are our goals, this is how we're going to hit them, and this is how we do it over time. And I always will get voice. So even I'm in a situation now where we have with the intervention, the state intervention, now the direct line of reporting from the superintendent goes straight to the commissioner. So the whole idea with the intervention in Providence was, or one of the big ideas, was to reduce the number of direct reports for the superintendent so that it was easier to get business done more quickly. And so the direct line of supervision for the superintendent is now the commissioner. And the commissioner has been clear that she wants one set of curricular materials in ELA and math. And so, and she's also clear that she wants teacher input. So what we did was we brought each principal with a team of five members of their leadership team to look at a couple of the curriculum materials in ELA and math that were already being used in the district and had already been vetted by the Department of Education. we did a session on those curricular materials. I had a coach from each of the schools that was using the different materials talk about those materials. We looked at a website called Ed Reports, which rates curricular materials. So they looked at what was rated highly and what wasn't. And then they're going back to their school teams and having those conversations, and they're giving us feedback on a form about what their choices would be. So even in times when we have to make quicker decisions, I'm always going to get feedback from the people who are impacted by those decisions. Thank you. Hello.
How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good. So I know a little bit about this area and your background on it, but if you can elaborate,
Sure.
that would be awesome. So here in Everett Public Schools, we provide a lot of opportunities for kids, extracurriculars, activities, ways to get involved in the arts and theater, with like different languages. We have a lot of electives that we offer for kids to have them connect in smaller communities. And we provide all of those. We are able to support our kids in taking tests for AP, for world languages and stuff like that, all without fees to do so, which enables our kids to kind of reach that success a lot easier. What is your thoughts and opinions on being able to continue that sort of framework, as well as what are your thoughts on incorporating arts into our academy model or humanities and stuff like that? If you could just elaborate on that.
Sure. Yeah, I think I believe in a well-rounded education. I think that it's very important that students have access and opportunity to those types of things that will get them engaged in school and have a joy for coming to school and having friend groups that are involved and interested in the same things, having activities that will help them get into colleges, help them with their careers. And so for me, the no-cost sports is a no-brainer. I'm a big athlete, or I wasn't a big athlete, but I enjoyed sports, and they were very important to me. So my girls, all three of my girls currently play ice hockey, and I coach their team. So for me, it's just a part of it's just what we do. And so I believe in the importance and the value of athletics. One, so the no-cost sports for me is just it's a must. And I also see how much pride there is in the community here in Everett around the athletics. And so for me, that's very important, and it's a thing that a number of teachers asked about. And then my mom was an artist and an art teacher, and so I feel like the arts are something that brings another level of joy to people's lives. It provides empathy, it provides it increases self-esteem. There are just so many benefits to music and theater and visual arts and I already said the performing arts. So to me, that just creates a well-rounded experience for a student. It creates a well-rounded community, and I believe that it's an incredibly important thing to maintain for Everett.
I guess I'll go from the
You're back.
Sublime to the ridiculous. But this is another question I've asked the other candidates.
Okay,
as well.
great.
Okay, so in Massachusetts, we have the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. In communities like ours, gateway communities, we refer to them, urban communities with a lot of challenges, a lot of EL students, socioeconomic, poverty and everything else.
Right.
The MCAS test is a major sword of Damocles over the head of the district. In the accountability system that the state has. And for instance, we've had Lawrence and Holyoke and Southbridge in the state of Massachusetts that are in receivership, have been taken over by the state. And you're just going through that in Providence. And yet, I will say, and I'm going to give my own opinion, right? I don't think that the tests are the only measure that we should use to evaluate how districts are doing, how students are doing. I think the arts are really incredibly important, social emotional learning, all those things, but for which there is no real test.
Right.
How do I put this? Do we test kids too much, and do we place too much emphasis on these state tests?
Yeah, I think that we often do test students too much. And by that, I mean we often err toward the compliance-based assessments that are designed to create feedback for teachers to use to improve instruction. But when it plays out in the classroom, they often are not all aligned, and so you end up with students taking different types of assessments that are not aligned, and then teachers having to use assessments or having to give assessment that they don't find actionable. So I haven't experienced it in Massachusetts, so I would want to look at it with a fresh set of eyes. I do think that assessment is important, and I do think that accountability is important. And I also think that states, including, I think Massachusetts is leading the way on this in many ways, are evolving in their use of assessment and other data to measure the health of a school. So I believe that they're using growth metrics, right? So it's not just about absolute proficiency anymore. They're using absenteeism data. States are the language acquisition data, I think, is important to have as a part of the accountability system, and the other factors that are used around sort of the mass core, and those are things that show that there's a more well-rounded education. I think it's hard to get perfect, but I think that states are getting better about using data in a way that's more nuanced and tells a better story. And I think that it is helpful to know where you are too. I mean, in looking at the data from Everett, I've noticed that in some grades, there are some real bright spots where there are grades in 5th grade and 7th grade and 8th grade at individual schools and in high school that are outperforming the state. So I think it's also helpful to see, how do we measure up against the state in certain areas? Are there bright spots that we can build off of? And but the question for me is, how do we use those data meaningfully? How do we make sure that they actually are something that we can use? And so I would want to make sure that the assessment, that the system for assessment was coherent, and continue to work with the state around improvements and sort of evolution of the assessment process. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for keeping me going, by the way. I appreciate it. Otherwise, it'd be really awkward.
But I've been asking the same 3 questions to all candidates.
Sure, that's great.
Third question that has been asked to all the others. As superintendent, you get echoes of people or teachers complaining that they are not happy at their school. You're hearing that the climate is not good. As you know, people perform better when they're happy at work.
Absolutely.
How would you address, knowing a specific school, that there are issues that are going on that are creating a negative work environment?
Yeah. So I would, for schools where there are concerns, I mean, I think the first thing is understanding where the concern is coming from. I don't think I would be in a situation where I was surprised that there was a concern at a school, because I would be spending time in schools. The way that I like to organize my week is that I block out chunks of my calendar so that I can't schedule in there and no one can schedule in there for me to be in schools. And usually on a school visit, I'm walking with a principal or a group of teacher leaders or a coach or someone, and we're observing the culture in the hallways, in the front office. We're observing classrooms together and I believe in giving direct and actionable feedback. So I carry around a pretty simple, these are the things that I noticed, and sort of highlight the positives, and then I give a couple of questions, because in my observation, in a 10-minute observation, I'm usually not going to have a lot of things that I can say, I want you to change this, right? And I don't, nor do I think I should, but I may have questions, like, what is the assessment going to be around this, or is there going to be writing involved in the assessment of this concept, and those types of things. So basically, I would be spending time in classrooms every week, and in schools, obviously, every week as well. And so with that, I would be seeing if there were concerns in a building. And so for me, I believe I talked about the distributive leadership, but I also believe in having a close rapport and a close relationship with principals. I think that I want to give the principals the ability to run their buildings, period. And I want to make sure that principals feel supported by me to run their buildings. And so I believe that to do that, you have to have a close interactions and close connecting points with principals. And so I would do weekly or bi-weekly check-ins. So I do a one-on-one check-ins with all of my direct reports. We set goals over a 12-month period, which is also part of the evaluation cycle, which I think is good. And so we would set goals. We would be clear on targets and measurables, and we would check in on those. So with that, and that has worked for me in other positions to help improve where employees have been having a hard time, and that can I think doing that can help to support them so that they're successful. And then if there are real challenges at an individual school, then I want the principal to be able to have ownership over managing that. But if they billow out and over, then I would come in and meet with staff and understand what the concerns are. I would bring the whole team together, so the admin and teachers, to hear what the concerns were, and I would want to make sure that we were clear about what the problems were and that we developed plans to address those problems. And I've done some of that in Providence, and I think in a district with 9 schools, I would be able to do some of that even more. Or do that work even more, and that's one of the things that excites me about the role is the ability to have that time in schools with principals and working on the school improvement. Thank you.
Oh, great. Excellent. Actually, I want to do this later. So Tom, we spent a lot of time today.
Yes.
And I talked about a bunch of things, but one thing, as I was interviewing from building the building, one of my concerns as a school committee member, and I'm a sales guy, I'm not an educator.
Right.
When we talk about the standards, the new state standards, I'm going to rely on you and the building leaders to interpret and set the goals and whatnot. But there's one thing that I do understand, and it's chronic absenteeism, especially on the high school level.
Yeah.
And I know you've been watching the meetings online.
Yep.
That slipped. So, and it's 35% by the recent
Yes.
presentation. I mean, have you tackled chronic absenteeism in the past? If so, what type of tactics, what worked, what didn't work? Because I look at the absentee level, and we can make all kinds of progress in other academic areas and whatnot. And this could be a real boat anchor for her. That's a fear of mine.
Yeah, and I mean, chronic absenteeism is a national trend. Increased rates of chronic absenteeism is a national trend that everyone in all cities across the nation are trying to figure out. Some districts have started to do things that are showing signs of addressing that. So for me, ultimately, chronic absenteeism comes down, it can't be addressed with one single thing. So you have to have a positive school culture where students want to come to school each and every day. Students have to feel like they have services that can help them be successful if they're not successful. it's important that there's direct connection between adults and students, so students feel like there's someone there who they can talk to, who can help drive them to services. And one of the things I heard today at the high school was just concern among the counseling and the social emotional support staff around the caseload numbers, and just feeling overwhelmed by the amount of students who they have to support. I really like the idea of the academy model. The academy model and small learning communities is a strategy to address chronic absenteeism, because it puts smaller number of students with a smaller number of adults, and there's an opportunity for a better communication there. And so I think it's about the small learning communities. As a principal, I had small learning communities in my school, and there were small learning communities in other schools in districts that I've been in that have shown success in increasing attendance. There are also some specific things that you can do, and we've done some of these, although chronic absenteeism is still an issue in Providence, no doubt. Right now, we've done a pilot using nudge letters. So the nudge letters are letters that can go home, kind of like a gas bill letter, that goes home every couple. The duration of the letter is very important. So it goes home 3 or 4 times in a year and gives a family a sense and a student a sense of where they are in how many days they've been absent and how important it is to come to school. So I think nudge letters is one strategy that can be implemented. We also have work with a group that helps us with two-way messaging. So we're sending two-way text messages to families to both encourage attendance and also to let families know when their child is absent and that it's important for them to be in school. So that two-way text messaging actually, I find to be, we have found to be very helpful. It also helps as a family and community engagement strategy. But we don't have the answer, and I think it doesn't come down to one thing. It comes down to multiple different types of practices. Good, thanks. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Now that's the same question I asked the other 3 candidates.
Okay.
And if someone already did, I apologize. I just got here.
Okay.
In the last year or so, how many other school districts have you applied to be the superintendent?
Mm-hmm.
How many have you gotten an interview? How many have been finalists, semifinalists? I mean, you don't have to name the districts. I understand.
Okay.
I'm expected to name the district,
Yeah.
but approximately how many?
Yeah. So I've applied to I've applied to 3 districts, and I have, so I've applied to 3 districts. This is the district that I'm furthest along in. The other 2 districts are on a timeline that is behind this timeline. So when the superintendent in Providence resigned and left on his own volition, he was ready to move on. And then the state intervention started to happen. I started to think about, okay, is it time for me to start looking for something? And I aspire to be a superintendent. So I said that earlier. And I started looking. I didn't know Everett. I still don't know Everett all that well, but I was really taken by the opportunity in Everett. So earlier I talked about the Student Opportunity Act and the opportunity atlas that talks about that shows that Everett is a great place for families and student and children who are living in poverty as a place where there are high outcomes for students in that situation. And so I was just very interested in Everett, and that was just confirmed for me today. I mean, from the shine on the floors. Which is truly, I mean, it's hard to keep buildings clean. We outsource it in Providence. The fact that the custodial staff are Everett employees and are so invested in their buildings, and many of them Everett residents, and have such a pride for their school. Yeah, so I have applied for other superintendent positions. I do aspire to be a superintendent, but I didn't say this before, I want to stay somewhere. I don't want to. This is not a stepping stone for me. In my first interview here, I was asked about sort of longevity, and I said that I think that if I was offered a 10-year contract right now, I would take it. So I'm here. I have a family. I have 3 young children. I don't want to move my family around a lot. I want to be settled. I want to work with the community. I want to be part of a community, and so that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Excuse me. Mr. Brunsky, while we have you here, have you applied to any other, for any superintendent position?
Yes, I have, Mr.
Okay, right? But, what's your commitment to Everett?
I've been here 30 years, Mr.
Right, okay. Just want to clarify that.
So one thing we haven't discussed, or it's on your resume, your experience with collective bargaining.
Yes.
And your philosophy behind it. Have you done it?
Mm-hmm.
What have some of your experiences been, good and bad?
Yeah.
We do have the leadership here from the ETA. It's kind of a new frontier from us from a relationship standpoint.
Yeah.
Would you agree? And, and it's something that, it's one of those areas that we can certainly build on as the area.
Sure.
It's an opportunity.
Sure.
So if you just talk to us.
Okay. Yeah, so in the way that Providence is set up, I actually don't participate in collective bargaining. That the mayor has done the collective bargaining, and there's a team from the mayor and the superintendent and attorneys and stuff. So I haven't been a part of the actual collective bargaining meetings, but I am a part of the joint committee. So we have a joint committee that includes a certain number of people from Providence Public Schools, and they have to match, right, a certain number of people from the Providence Teachers Union, and we meet every other week. And we have a pretty close and working relationship, and I think that's the only way to do it. So we kind of go through.
So it's like a labor management team?
Yes.
Labor management group
Yes.
that meets together.
Yeah. So we go through sort of individual issues, right? So we collectively develop a agenda, sorry. And so they'll put some pieces on the agenda, we'll put some pieces on the agenda, and we meet every other week. And we pretty much hold to it unless there's nothing on the agenda, but we keep in really close contact. And I'll call up our president, our teachers union president, and have a conversation. I'll give her a heads up, look, this thing's going down, I want you to know. She'll let us know. And so I think it's really important to have that, ability to have someone on speed dial and have that conversation, have the regular time for meeting. I think when people sit together, they realize that they're actually in it for the same reasons and that they can work through this together. So, not that it's been perfect in Providence. We had it took a while to get to the agreement, but my philosophy would be to have that regular meeting, to make sure we were holding to it, to make sure that we were working together collaboratively. And from our conversation today, and I met Ms. Auger earlier, I feel like I don't see any reason why that can't happen. And I also think we have to work together. I mean, I really think it's important that we do things together. So that we send like collective messages. So I think there are times at the beginning of the school year, at the holidays, at different times where we could actually message together. And I think there's some power in that to show everybody that we're together. And then there are specific things that, this may come up later, but there are specific things that we've done in Providence with teachers as leaders, and the Providence Teachers Union has been a part of that work. So around evaluation, we work closely on evaluation, kind of obviously, but we also have professional learning communities where teachers built our interim assessments. They built our standards bundles, so we bundled standards to align to an interim assessment. They built those. They built what we call landmark assignments. So those are like performance tasks that students take at the end of a unit. So I believe in and I think those are both important for sort of engagement and empowerment and distributed leadership, but also I think that they create better assignments and better relationships, and they're a professional learning opportunity for everybody. So doing things like that, I also think just help the relationship. Negotiations are still negotiations, and sometimes you get locked in and it's hard to get out, and I get that. And I don't, obviously I don't know what happened in Everett recently, but I just know that I think working together, then even you can get through those things when you get locked in on an issue.
A comment before the question.
Okay.
Everyone would want a 10-year contract probably, but.
I say that in jest.
I agree, but hopefully the long-term contracts, that's thing of the past.
Evergreen contract.
My question. It was a question that someone else asked a candidate, and I thought it was a very good question. We have a large ELL population.
Yes.
But we also have special ed students, students that fall into other categories. But we also have the students that some people are feeling that are being neglected. Mm-hmm. So if we can put that into the category of differentiated instruction, how as a superintendent can you assure that every student here in Everett, not just ELL students or special ed, but the entire population student of Everett will get the best education possible? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to me, that's the deep work. It's the sort of all means all. What is usually people talk about all means that for the students that we're kind of leaving behind. But I think we also sometimes forget about the students who can be challenged more. And I think we have to do both. And so there are a lot of different ways to do that. And I think it looks different at elementary and at middle and at high school. I think there's a lot of work that can happen inside of classrooms that is either differentiation or personalization or sort of whatever the word of the day is. But that's not easy. And so teachers have, you know, right? You have a big class, right? You have 20, I heard 30, 28, right? So pretty big classes. And you have to do that for multiple students, so that's hard. So I think really thinking about AP, I know you offer AP. I met with a number of students who are taking AP courses, but are there ways to expand advanced placement and think about how we create more offerings for students to accelerate? And then I also think working with English language learners, which in Rhode Island we've started, the new commissioner has brought in a term that she's used in New York called multilingual learners. So thinking about our multilingual learners as an asset to the school community, which a teacher at the high school brought up today, or maybe it was you, Mr. Parker. How many of you speak multiple languages, right? What do you think about being able to speak another language? There's such power in being multilingual that I think we need to find ways to build on that and to create that skill as an asset that we celebrate. And I also think that we need to provide specific instruction for students who are just learning English. And that's, sheltered content instruction and very sort of intentional instruction about language development, while also making sure that they're having access to the core. We're obligated by federal law to ensure that they have access to the standards. And so that is probably the hardest thing. I don't know if you all would agree with me, but that's probably the hardest thing for a teacher to do is to meet the needs of students across a classroom. And so I think for me, having common planning time where teachers can plan together and sort of reduce the amount of individual planning that has to happen on your own so that you can think about different types of activities that can meet the needs of different students, using data to think about your groupings, I just think that there are a lot of ways that as teacher teams, when you have time to plan and think and work together, that you can address those issues within the classroom. And then there's AP, and there are other ways to, and pathways and CTE and other ways to challenge students and to give them opportunities to follow their path.
So what we've done in the past, since this is split up between Q&A with the staff
Yes.
and Q&A with the public, who has not yet arrived, is to let everyone know that we want to give you a chance to decompress for 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
Because you've been standing here for an hour and answering questions. If anyone has a last question they'd like to ask for this period, please do so now. If not, we can give you a break and you can drink some water.
Okay.
Right? Anyone? Okay. So we're going to make yours the last question for this session.
If anyone has other questions, please do so.
Okay, go ahead, Randy.
In Washington, D.C., I believe you worked in charter schools?
Yes.
I was just reading something online today where the federal government gave millions of dollars to charter schools and some of them never opened. Mm-hmm. What did you learn working in a charter school that molded you as a teacher, an educator, mm-hmm. and what did you bring back, mm-hmm. or what did you leave behind, kind of? Coming back to the public school system.
Thank you.
Because you're probably aware, there was a question on the ballot, the no on 2 campaign, several,
right.
2016,
mm-hmm.
And the people said, no, we don't want more charter schools.
Right. Sure. Yeah, so thank you. I have, in Washington, D.C., there are 111 traditional public schools. And there are another, I don't know the number now, there are about another 100 some charter schools. So in D.C., there was an act passed called the Reform Act in D.C., and that was an act that sort of opened the doors, and it did a bunch of things around evaluation and a bunch of different things, but it addressed charters, and it opened the door for more charters to come in. So I think it's just important to understand the landscape in D.C., which was that there are just many, many more charters operating in the city, and so there's less of a dialogue about do we like charters or not like charters. It's sort of part of the landscape of the system. So I actually worked in an African-centered charter school as a special education coordinator for 1 year. And it was a very small little school that gave me my first opportunity to learn about early childhood and sort of we had pre-K students, and so I learned about that experience. That school mismanaged funds, and the head of the school ended up getting in major trouble for that. So that showed me, right, I'm okay, I'm not anti-charter, but I believe in traditional public schools, and I don't want to be anywhere but traditional public schools, and I want to make sure traditional public schools are healthy and receive the equitable funding and the appropriate funding, and that charters are not taking away funding from traditional public schools. So that's sort of where I sit right now. I was at a high school for 2 years where there was a charter operator that was asked to come in and help break the school into 4 small schools. But I was still a traditional public school employee, and I still worked with I still was a part of the traditional public school, but it was a different type of arrangement. And what I found there is that it's really hard it was really hard for the charters and for the charter school and for the traditional public school to work together in a way where there was an aligned message and where there was long-term thinking and planning. And so that experience I really value, and it was there was a lot of good work that happened, and it was a really important experience for me, but it sort of taught me that you have to be careful, and I mentioned it earlier, that in the hurrying and sort of making quick moves and quick policy decisions without a lot of public input doesn't always lead to something better, and often it can set you back. So My belief is, where I want to be in traditional public schools. I support traditional public schools. My kids were in DC public schools. When I worked in DC public schools, we moved to Providence and moved into the city, and my kids are in Providence public schools, despite many people telling me I was crazy for doing that. And so that's who I am. But I have been in a couple of charter schools, but that's, I think in terms of Everett too, I don't know about the landscape, although I did see a charter school on my way in. And like I said, I'm not anti-charter schools. I think there are ways to partner, but I do believe that that my focus is the traditional public schools, and that's where it would be here.
So, that's it.
Okay.
And why don't you take a break for
Okay, all right.
10 minutes or so? And thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Well, welcome to the general public session of the Q&A period. We've only got a few more bodies. Mr. Flanagan is the Chief Academic Officer in Providence, Rhode Island. He's one of the 4 finalists for the superintendency. Before we start the question and answer period, just a real quick update where we are within the process. So as you know, we started this back in March with the Mass Association of School Committees. If you look at the website, you see that the search contains 5 phases. We are in phase 4. On Saturday, all 4 candidates will be interviewed here at the Everett High School Library at 9 o'clock with Todd Stewart. 9 o'clock with Todd Stewart, 10:30 with Priya Talihani, 1 o'clock Paul Toner, and Mr. Flanagan will be back at 2:30. That will be the end of phase 4, and the next week we move on to phase 5, which will end up being at some point when it's announced the actual meeting to vote for a superintendent. So that's where we're on the timeline. It's getting close. It's happening. It's real. Winter is coming. And with that, if you got any questions, Mr. Flanagan, have at it. The other thing we ask is if you come up and talk into the microphone so we can record it on TV. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. And I did this at the beginning of the last session as well, but I really wanted to thank you, Mr. Parker, for spending the time with me today. We had a great visit to a number of schools, and I was just so impressed by the facility, by the openness of staff to ask questions. We had the opportunity to walk schools. We had the opportunity to meet with groups of teachers, and I found that teachers were very open and honest and thoughtful and really interested and invested and engaged in the conversation. So it was truly a great day, and I really want to thank you, Mr. Parker, for spending the time with me today. I am Tom Flanagan. I'm the Chief Academic Officer in Providence Public Schools, and I have come from Washington, D.C. originally, so I was born actually in Western Massachusetts, in sort of the middle of a small town in Western Massachusetts. But quickly, my family moved, my mom and my dad moved to Washington, D.C., and I grew up in a neighborhood where many families were coming into the United States from El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras. And it was traditionally an old African-American neighborhood. And so there was a lot of history and a lot of vibrance and a lot of diversity. And I have a lot of friends from the neighborhood. But I also went to school in a different neighborhood. And that helped me, and seeing that formed my philosophy for education. I believe that education is the change, the opportunity for change for students, for children across all groups, all ethnicities, and all groups. And so I believe that ultimately it can be the equalizer if we are committed as an entire community to making sure that the educational opportunities are there for all students. So that's something that I sort of believed in my core, and in the past, in my career, have spent time working on issues of equity as the Chief Academic Officer in Providence. Before that, I was overseeing special education in Washington, D.C., so there are 111 schools in Washington, D.C., and I was overseeing that work there. I was a teacher and an assistant principal and a principal, and also come from a family of educators. I told the last group, but I aspire to be a superintendent. I look to my grandfather, Tony Sabella, who was the superintendent in Westchester, Massachusetts, also a football official. I hear we have some officials in the room, and so I aspire to be like him one day. Coming to Everett, I was very impressed by the facilities, by the people, by the programs. We walked in the door, we were greeted by a group of students who had, were excited to greet us, and I asked them what the best thing about Everett was, and they told me the teachers. So right off the bat, and I think they meant the adults who work with them, but they were very clear that the adults who work with them and the community that supports them, it makes them feel like they are important. And so I hope to be a part of that, of the community here. I think if I were to have the opportunity to be the superintendent in Everett, I would focus on ensuring shared responsibility for the work, and I would want to focus on equity and excellence, so making sure that there's excellence for all students, and I would want to make sure we did that through family and community partnership, and making sure that we're really bringing families and community into all of the conversations that we're having as an organization. So with that, again, I'm humbled to be here. I appreciate the opportunity very much, and I'm open for questions. Takes a while to get it going.
Hi, Katie Steinberg.
Hello.
Everett resident. So my question, probably have a few today.
Great.
What would you do to promote community engagement as superintendent?
Yeah, so I think that community and family engagement is really important, and I think there are multiple ways to do that. I think that there are some straightforward things around ensuring that there are clear lines of communication, and that there are interpretation services, and that families feel welcome, and their language is acknowledged as an asset, and their culture is celebrated. And so I feel like that's one way to help bring community into buildings. I also believe that it's important for school officials and schools to be in the community, and so I know that's not an issue here. I've heard that many throughout all the schools that I visited, people are from Everett, they're proud of Everett, and they're here. So how do we continue to, are there ways to sort of continue to create those situations? So for me, I would want to hold a series of town hall meetings, and I would have a 100-day plan, and a lot of that coming in, and a lot of that plan would be around engaging community and hearing their voice about what they think is going well and what they would like to see get better. And then I also think that it's engaging the families and communities is not always easy, but we in Providence have what we call community advisory boards. So in schools that are identified as needing improvement, they are required to have a community advisory board. And this is a new requirement of the state law, and we were sort of in Providence trying to figure out how to do it, and a little skeptical about being able to pull it off and being able to get authentic feedback from the community on individual school plans. And so we did an application process. We really pushed it out to all the communities and made sure that people felt like they really understood that we were asking them to be a part of something. And then we gave them real work. So they actually did a needs assessment of individual schools. They did a root cause analysis, and they built a plan, a school improvement plan with the school-based team. So those two working in tandem, those two entities working in tandem, that had a budget that was significant from their school improvement dollars. And we found that 3 of the elementary schools that had the most engaged community advisory boards got out of intervention status in 1 year. So that says a lot, number one, to me about the fact that community will come out and engage when they feel like their input is really meaningful, and when you give them real work to do. So that's one example. Not all community and family members are going to be able to engage like that. There were a lot of meetings that we had to do, but people came out, and it was a very powerful process that did end up changing outcomes for students and for schools. You know, and then I think there are ways to, I've heard that the back to school nights are well attended, and the parent teacher conferences. I think that's really important. And so I would want to just sort of experience that and see how that goes, and build on that if there are ways to continue to build on any of the bright spots that are happening around family and community engagement.
Hi.
Hi.
I'd like to move a little further back in time in your resume, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about, you have a fairly significant background in charter school work. I'd like you to talk about where you envision charter schools fitting or not fitting into
Yeah.
Everett, and what you imagine and what.
Yeah. Okay. So I received a similar question in the first forum, and I think it's important to know the context. So in Washington, D.C., there are 111 traditional public schools, and there are, I don't know the exact number now, but there are about 100 public charter schools as well. So the landscape it's really like almost half and half charter and traditional public school. So I came from, you know, a city where the charters are really just a part of the fabric of public education, and there's less of a debate, but there is a lot of pull for resources, and there's a significant feeling among those proponents of the traditional public schools that the charter schools there's not enough, they're taking the per pupil, so there's less dollars flowing to the traditional public schools. I think that's even more true in smaller communities, and so I think that I'm a proponent for good schools. My children went to public school in Washington, D.C. when I worked in Washington, D.C. and lived there. My children go to public school in Providence now, and people thought I was crazy for doing that when I came there, and there were some good charters there. So I think in some ways just my actions show where I believe the value is, and where I hope that work can be focused. So I don't know what the landscape of charters so much in Everett yet. I do think in some ways I know they're playing a role, because I know that they have a significant population. I think I maybe heard 1,000 students. And I also know that Everett is sort of busting at the seams in terms of enrollment and space. And so I think that those are conversations to be had. I am 100% committed to in my career from here on out, and from the past 7 years of my work, to traditional public schools. And I believe that's where the real work is for me, and that's what the kind of work I want to do with the community. So I wouldn't be anti-charter school necessarily, but I think there's so much work to do in the traditional public schools, that would be my sole focus.
I just wanted to quickly follow up.
Sure.
I'm also a parent with kids in the public school. That's why I'm here tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
So in Massachusetts, when we say public school, technically charter schools are public schools.
Right.
So when you say your children are in public school, do you mean public charter schools, or they were in public district traditional schools?
Traditional
In
district
DC
schools
and here.
in DC and here.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep. Hi, Tom.
Tom, from your resume, your background, you've got Washington DC, you've got Providence, and now you're heading this direction. So this almost sounds like a senseless question, but in terms of politics, I don't want to steal Frank's line, but I believe politics in Everett, he said, is a contact sport. I mean, what's your experience been in terms of dealing with mayors, city councils, school committees, things like that? And how do you get all of that to work when you're talking budgets, things like that? I mean, I know it's a very, very big picture question, but basically what's your style in terms of dealing with the political scene?
Yeah. So I believe that everyone plays an important role, city council, city hall, in supporting the school department. And I think if we can get behind, or if Everett or a district anywhere really can get behind a clear strategic plan with clear and measurable outcomes that is developed with the community, then everyone understands where they're going. I think when there are the challenges that I've seen are when there are special projects outside, ideas that kind of push into the core work, and so I believe that it's very important to develop a strategic plan collaboratively, include obviously the school committee in that process, but also City Hall and City Council and families and communities and schools. And I think the more of a shared vision and strategic plan that you can create, the more people understand the direction you're going, and the easier it is to say, look, these are our priorities. Can you support these priorities? And if they have that, then they're less likely to say, yeah, but what about this? And what about these other things that might take us off of our path? And I think it's super important because I've been in 2 districts where there are mayoral appointed, Providence is the mayoral appointed school board. So the Providence is under a state intervention right now, or a state takeover, and so that changed the line of authority from what was, under the majority of my time there, a mayoral appointed school board plus a mayor. So the superintendent reported to those 2 entities, plus had to report to city council, plus had to meet all the requirements of RIDE, and RIDE is in the same town, so there's a lot of connection there, and that just created a lot of different priorities. And I think that we could have been more clear on these are the priorities that we need to be focusing on, and let's drive our resources toward those priorities. I believe that it's important to keep in close communication. So we worked really closely with the mayor's office on some initiatives that were a part of the strategic plan that I think were really important, like expanding early childhood. We worked on expanding summer learning opportunities and after-school opportunities, and that happened through spending time together, developing project plans, figuring out the budget, and we wouldn't have been able to make those things happen without the support of City Hall. And so I think that the groups have to work together, and if we keep students in mind at the forefront of every decision that we're making, and we ground that in a strategic plan, then there's less likelihood of being knocked off of the path. And so yeah, lots of sort of direct and honest communication about what the priorities are.
Hi again.
Hello.
So it's a fact through secondary education, higher education, that the diversity in the classroom doesn't reflect the diversity of the faculty. So I was just wondering what plans you have to promote diversity among the faculty.
Great. Yeah, I think that's really an important thing for a school department to address. I think it was interesting when I walked around the schools today. I saw such a deep pride for Everett And so many people who told me they went to the schools in Everett and they're still here living in Everett. So I think in many ways that community exists, and that is really important. And I wouldn't want to disrupt that. Because I met a teacher at the Adams School who came back. She wanted to grab me to say, do you believe in pre-K and early childhood? And I said, I do. But she said she had just moved back, and she was committed to Everett schools. And I think we should make sure that we're keeping that. I think we also need to think about, and I'm sure these things have happened, but I think it's important to partner with local universities to really think about how we create partnerships. So we've done that in Providence with our ESL certification. So we found out that we needed 40 new ESL teachers to meet the terms of a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice around English learners or multilingual learners. And we are still trying to figure that out. But we went to a school that didn't traditionally have teacher prep programs. So there are some schools that have teacher prep programs that teachers come through, and they're good, and we need them. But we needed a low cost and a faster track toward certification for ESL teachers to meet our demand. So we went to a local university and developed a partnership with them where we have a competency-based ESL certification program that's at a low cost. About 40 teachers have enrolled over the past 2 years to be a part of that program. And when you provide opportunities that you publicize that get teachers into hard to fill areas, and I think there's an opportunity to start recruiting different types of people too. And so I think it's important. The recruitment is important. There are districts in DC, we had on the sides of buses, pictures with teachers working with kids and saying, come teach in DC. Those things there's a benefit to branding to help bring people. I think the branding here on the academies is really, really top notch. And I think that helps provide something that people can say, look, like, come here. But I also think that the word of mouth, the thing with Everett is you've got so much competition close by that you've got to have something that makes people want to come to the city, and I think that exists. I see it in the schools. Facilities matter. I see that in the positive staff that we met at the English school, at Adams, at the high school, and at Devon's, and at Whittier. We saw some really committed staff who are here, and if they can spread the word. So I think it's a combination of providing opportunities for people to get in, a way to sort of publicize and get the word out that this is something that we care about too. People don't necessarily, I don't always know that that's something that you care about, so that might be a priority that we set in the strategic plan. But I also don't want to isolate people or have them feel like they're not of worth who are currently working in the system. So I think it's a balance. The other thing that we're starting to develop in Providence is a tighter collaboration with Rhode Island College and their teacher prep program with one of our high schools who has a pathway for teaching. So that is maybe something that's already happening here, but that's a great way to create a path from a student for us who goes to high school. They get into the college that's in the same neighborhood, and then they become a teacher. And so building that, we've had that program for a while, and we've had some of that collaboration, and we do have teachers who have come back, but a lot of there's work to do to build that relationship to make sure that there's a connection back to the schools.
Well, I have the opportunity to ask you questions today and Saturday. So,
great.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience with English language learners?
Yes. So I currently, as the Chief Academic Officer, one of the the offices that I support or that reports to me is the Office of Multilingual Learners. We just changed the name a few weeks ago based on the changes in nomenclature that are happening in the state. So I've learned a lot about about multilingual learners, about sheltered content instruction, about language acquisition. For me, I have a special education background, and I was a special education, I oversaw special education for DC Public Schools, and I worked alongside of the Office of Language Acquisition there, but to be sort of knee-deep in this work with someone, with my director, has been something that has been, I think, very important for me and for the district. So we have, Providence has, 6 years ago, 18% of students were English language learners. Today, 34% are English language learners. And so we were not able to keep up over the past 10 years with the growth of English language learners. And so we are currently in a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice, which I mentioned earlier, that spells out really clear deliverables and metrics that we need to meet, and helps to push us in a way that we wouldn't have been able to push, I don't think, without them. So for me, it's asset-based. The first thing is that students these are students who are going to have multiple languages. They're going to know they're going to be able to communicate with 4 times as many people as people who are not multilingual. So seeing them as an asset, not seeing them as a drain on resources, but seeing them as in the gifts and the strengths that they bring to the school community, I think is number one. And I think that happens just through kind of talking about that and thinking about that and making sure that that's a part of the way that we talk about them. I think that it's really important that students who are learning English have specific and strategic sheltered content instruction. They learn language acquisition. They learn language acquisition skills. And that teachers have the appropriate training to be able to get them to be able to meet them where they are. They also need to have access to the standards. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll withhold the standards from students who are learning English when they may have the standards in another language, right? They may be able to master the standards in another language. So how do we create situations where and opportunities for students to continue to progress toward the standards while also learning English? So one of the things we're looking at in Providence, 9 of our elementary schools have adopted an ELA curriculum called, I won't say what it's called, that has materials in Spanish. And so we've created dual language programs. These materials started in dual language programs, and they're also highly rated curricular materials. We use Ed Reports, so that's an organization that is a third-party rater of curricular materials. So I think a lot of it's figuring out the professional development and making sure that that's there. It's making sure that the appropriate materials are there. It's making sure that there are supports. So we've also added some coaching as a part of our support for English language for ESL teachers and also general education teachers to support ESL students, which I think is really important, because I think a lot of times, almost every time, we want to do the best we can for all the students in front of us, but it's intimidating when we don't know exactly what to do. I know Massachusetts has a set for endorsement for ESL, so I'd want to kind of look at that and see what types of skills the endorsement is giving or the training is giving for general educators. But I think that it's really important to have the materials, the assessment, and the mindset when you're working with English learners. And I think good teaching for English learners is good teaching for everybody. So I do think that there are these strategies that transcend. Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
So I have
have a question about the future of our young people's future in the industrial world and what you have done or what you might try to do to recalibrate the conversation among young people in that regard.
Okay.
Specifically the predatory lending practices around higher education and alternatives in their career paths.
Got it. So I think that, first of all, I was really impressed by the pathway work that's happening at the high school and the career and technology, the CTE work that's happening at the high school. For me, it's college and career. And I believe that we need to be preparing students for both college and career, but we also need to be providing guidance for students about how to apply, how to prepare, how to get yourself prepared, what type of debt that they could be able to take on. There are financial literacy courses that could be a part of the curriculum, or maybe already are here. I haven't actually looked at that yet, but I believe that a lot of it comes down to how do we both prepare students for college and career. But in that career, the CTE world is really changing. So we can connect students with businesses, with high wage, high demand businesses, and work with the business community to make sure that our CTE programs are aligned to those high demand, high wage jobs. We've done that work in Providence. We continue to do that work in Providence with Electric Boat and with other industries that are within Rhode Island. But I think it's really important. I think someone asked about sports and no-cost sports. To me, the CTE and the connections to the workforce are really important for students to ground their education so that they see why they're in school. So we have a CTE school in Providence where students do a week about. So they're a week in their CTE programming and then a week in their content. And they are really engaged because they know that they're headed towards something that has meaning for them. And has earning potential, and the majority of them are going to end up going to college, but they're going to have support. They're going to be able to support themselves through college. They are going to know what they're studying, so they're not just spinning their wheels in college. And so I think that a lot of it starts with the CTE and the pathways work, and ensuring that students have the opportunity to really understand where they're going to go after high school and what their plans are early on, which is through advising, through counseling. We did meet with a team of counselors and social workers and therapists today. I think I may have gotten their exact jobs not totally perfect, but what they're saying is that they're really stressed by the caseloads and by the number of students that they're having to serve. And so I think for me, that's one thing that really popped today. I'd want to think about, is there a way to create different caseloads for guidance counselors and for that office at the high school to be able to really work with students to map out their future around college and career. So that was my answer. Did I answer your question?
Close. But specifically about the conversation among young people, I should go to the microphone. So a little more on working with guidance counselors and how these conversations are occurring with young people, especially around their ability to lend and borrow money, and how that will impact their potential career, but more specifically, some reasonable economic analysis of what their pursuits might yield as a result.
Yeah, so I think that kind of goes back to, for me, it goes back to the counseling conversation. I also know we can't put it all on counselors because counselors have 200, the recommendation is 250. Did I get that right? But 250 is still a huge amount of students that you're working with in counseling, right? So it does come down to how do we have more of, based on your line of questioning, I'm not sure how it is at Everett High School or in Everett, but it sounds like there's room for improvement there in some ways. And so to me, it's not about just the guidance counselors doing that work. It's about how do we have a more open and build more knowledge across faculty, and then I think that starts leading into the students being able to have that dialogue. But I still want to advocate for more guidance counselors at some point, I think, based on today.
As long as they don't say don't be a humanities major, 'cause that's, I feel like that's where you're going with that.
Oh, no, I run a nonprofit. Everybody else?
Hi, Tom. Nice to see you again, and again, I'll get to ask you a few other questions on Saturday.
Thank you.
Probably the most difficult job in the school system is that of a principal. If you, during your 100 days of coming in and analyzing what's going on, if you find that some principals are doing better jobs than others, how would you make sure that the principals who may not be performing as well as to your expectations, how would you make sure that they are going to meet your expectations, and what kind of incentives or what kind of programs would you like to incorporate so that they do meet the standards that they have to, your standards that you would have as superintendent of schools?
Okay. Thank you for that question. I think the principal from the superintendent perspective is probably the most important position in terms of leading change, because I believe in empowering principals to lead their buildings. And so I would want to make sure that we had really strong leaders in buildings so that they could lead their buildings, and there would be trust among the district and schools about how the buildings are running. So I really want to empower principals, but I'd want to use it looks to me like there's a strong sort of evaluation framework. I would want to make sure that we're looking at data from the school, make sure we're setting meaningful goals, check in on those goals regularly, and make sure that just the expectations are clear from the start. So I'd really want to start there. And then I also have looked in Providence. We're doing this now. There are professional learning opportunities there are a lot of different types of professional learning opportunities for principals that are out there that allow them to self-direct, to have more kind of self-directed learning. So I'd want to look for opportunities for students, for principals. So we have a group of principal supervisors who we presented an opportunity to, which is with the National Institute of School Leadership, and they were really excited about it, and they became trainers in this professional learning for school leaders. And since then, we've had 25 school leaders come in to that program, and it's starting to spread. So without me saying, this is what we're doing, we have to do it, I think that it was important that people came to these learning opportunities. So I would want to make sure that there were real strong learning opportunities for principals. One thing that I did in DC and I've done in Providence, and I would want to continue to do in Everett, is instructional rounds. So we do instructional rounds, which is where principals work with their school-based teams to set problems of practice. And we're running our own instructional rounds in Providence with our own Providence staff, which I think is also a great thing. You can do it different ways, but I like having the building the leadership of the staff in the school department or in the schools to be able to run these. So it's based on sort of the medical rounds model. So you have groups of principals walking the schools together and observing. And then what they do is they take those observations down and they figure out what the patterns are across the district. They give feedback to that principal. The principal goes back with their staff, although the staff are at the rounds too, and they give feedback to the staff, and they develop professional learning plans or sort of improvement plans for the district based on instructional rounds. So I've found that the cohort model, where you put principals, where principals are learning and working together on something that's focused on the instructional core of teachers, students, and content around the task that students are working on, has a huge benefit for professional growth. So I would just want to build lots of supports in, and I think that with empowerment and with professional learning, there sometimes are people who still are not able to meet the expectations. And I think it's a really hard job. It may not be a job for everybody, but I think that the majority, the vast majority of principals with support and with a cohort of colleagues and peers that they work with and with professional learning they're in it because they care about this work and they've done this work at multiple levels. So I think that those types of things will help. If not, I mean, I do believe in being really clear if performance is not meeting expectations and making sure that there are clear plans to address that and following through on those plans. Hello.
How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good. So I just wanted to take a chance to kind of get the elephant in the room out there.
Yes.
You do work for Providence Public Schools.
I do.
They are in receivership.
Yes, they are.
I just want to read something real quick. This is from the John Hopkins report. That was the research took place in May 2019. They released it in June. This is a quote from the article in The Atlantic. Teachers felt demoralized and unsupported. The English learning programs were in violation of the Equal Education Opportunities Act. Parents felt isolated from their children's education. The report went so far as to say that there was little visible student learning in classrooms at all. The buildings were deteriorating at the point of being health hazards. Some of the Johns Hopkins researchers found themselves walking out of buildings and crying. One researcher reported being physically ill. So my kids are in the school system,
Yeah.
and that report came out on your watch.
Yes.
So I just need you to speak to it.
Sure.
If you would.
Yes, absolutely. So Providence is currently in an intervention with the state. It's the first district in Rhode Island that has been in this intervention. This is something that has been a long time in the works and is a result of a lot and long sort of systems and structures that have broken down. I spoke publicly at the meetings where the community was deciding whether or not to approve the order, and I spoke publicly in favor of the state takeover in Providence. So I believe that is something that needed to happen in Providence, and I told the public that. I also took responsibility. I think that there are things that I could have done better in Providence to address some of those concerns that were in the Johns Hopkins report. And so I take full ownership of that work. There also of that, and I support the takeover, and I'm still in Providence working hard each and every day to make sure that students get what they need. My 3 daughters are elementary school students in Providence Public Schools. I believe that there are a lot of really positive things happening in Providence, and that a scathing report was necessary to create the conditions for change, and that happened. So that's kind of the direct response. There have since we had now take the MCAS. So the MCAS scores have improved. The graduation rates have stayed at 75%, despite 300 to 400 students coming in who are over age and undercredited in high school, or students with limited informal education. And we've increased advanced placement opportunities. We've decreased suspension. So I think that there's a lot of things that were not clear in the report. But I owned it with my community, and I have skin in the game. My kids are in the school, and I've been the chief academic officer for the past 3 years. So I think it's fair. I think the question is fair, and I want to make sure that I'm clear that I do think that there are many positive things that have happened in Providence Public Schools, and that this takeover was needed, and that I'm a part of the process for change there.
Can you point to any specific action other than supporting the takeover that you yourself took to try to improve the situation while you were there for 3 years?
Sure. So, well, I mean, I think a lot of what we've done over the past 3 years has been building the capacity of schools, principals, teachers to change. One of the problems that Providence has historically had is it's been a very top-down leadership model. And so we had a set of curricular materials that now are rated red on ed reports, which means you really should not be using them. And we went through, before my time, and did observations and made sure people were on the right page at the right time, and did a very, very sort of heavy top-down approach to curricular materials. And so what we did was we pulled back from that approach. We created a vendor fair where schools are allowed to make decisions about the curricular materials that they feel are most beneficial for their students. And 21 of 22 elementary schools chose a certain set of math curriculum that are rated highly on ed reports. And 9 of our schools have opted into a high quality ELA set of curricular materials. So I think in that example, there are many examples, but that's an example of empowerment of schools to make decisions based on the best interests of their students. And that's also an example of making decisions that will improve the day-to-day instruction in class and the outcomes for students. So to me, in Providence, it was a big shift in the way that we did business. We had 3 different tests in 5 different years, so it's also an adjustment to new assessments. And so that's sort of a multifaceted problem, which is why I spoke in favor of the state takeover, because I really felt that systems needed to be more clearly delineated and defined, and in order to make significant improvements.
Just a quick question. Given the problems that the public schools had in the report, did the report talk about adequate funding? Did the Providence Public Schools receive adequate funding in your?
In my interpretation, no. We don't have a weighting for English learners. We get a categorical allotment for English language learners, but we don't have a specific weighting for English language learners. That's something that we've been asking for. So there's a lot of debate about the funding formula, and then the city share of the funding of the city funding formula. Also, I do not think we are equitably funded. And if you actually look at the Education Trust's recent research on equitable funding in states, you'll see that we were not equitably funded.
I think most educators would say that schools aren't equitably funded. Yeah?
Well, if you look at the report from the Education Trust, there are states that are equitably funding at higher, there are some states that are, some states aren't. Sure. And it's also, I don't think it's only about money. I think that schools have to be funded appropriately to be successful, but it's not only about money.
So my question was really about, if we're going to mix it up, about what happened in Providence. Obviously, Providence was a hot mess before you got there. You took the job, and when you took the job as CAO, which is the person in charge of curriculum, in charge of instruction for students, in charge of all of that, right? Mm-hmm. You must have believed that you could fix what was wrong there, or you wouldn't have taken that job.
Yes.
So obviously you were not able to fulfill the community's desire to be fixed, and you did not actually manage to attain your goal of fixing the schools. What do you think went wrong, and how will you make sure that there's not something like that happening in your next district, whether it be Everett or somewhere else?
Yeah, so first of all, I think that you don't make change in a district, you don't make measurable change based on test scores, at least, in 3 years. So I'm in my 4th year in Providence. I don't believe you make change in 3 years. I've been saying this in sort of across the board. I believe you make measurable change over 5 to 7 years, and that's actually proven out in research. So for me, making a decision earlier around the curricular materials, I think would have helped us. But I was balancing an administration that was really heavily monitoring on a set of poor quality curricular materials that people were extremely frustrated with, a school board policy that mandated school autonomy, and a time and place where the folks, the third-party people who are now reviewing curricular materials had just started, and some of these curricular materials are just being rated now. So I think there were a number of things that were happening at that point. I have a lot of reflection on that, and I think in my next place, I would be more direct and upfront with my concerns about a policy that I feel is holding the district back. And that would take courageous conversations with the people, but I would have to say the why, and I'd have to be really clear with people about that. So again, I have taken ownership and public responsibility in Providence, and I have said that I agree with this, with the state takeover. I'm currently in Providence working on it now, and I believe in the team that's there working to make change. I think there will be change in Providence, and I think some of the things that we've done in Providence are things that you're going to start seeing change in the next year or two, that because it takes 5 years to see change in a district of 41 schools where there are major issues.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about budget and your involvement with it, either working with the superintendent or working with city council or
Sure.
the mayor, like how you're involved in all of this?
Sure. Yeah, so for budget, I've managed the IDEA budget in DC Public Schools, and I manage the directly sort of manage the federal budget in Providence. And so for me, I've learned a lot about budgeting through that process. We have almost $400 million budget in Providence. The title budget is about $28 million, but my team and my share is more than that. And so for me, it's making sure that we're really clearly looking at each individual line, so it's kind of zero-based budgeting, where we're justifying each line and going line by line through the budget to make sure that we're not carrying over things that are vestiges of the past or things that we just feel like we need without providing justification for those things. So I believe that it's very important to have that, to make sure that we're sort of checking ourselves as an organization to say, are these things we need? Do we need to continue with this or not? I think those conversations have to happen as a team. I think there needs to be, they need to be aligned to the strategic planning conversations, and they have to be directly tied to your strategic goals. So you have to figure out how you're driving back to the strategic goals.
How old are your kids?
My kids are 10 and 6.
Mine are 10 and 12, so we've got similar stuff going on. You have skin in the game and your kids are in the public schools. Why are you making the decision to pull them out of school and not see the receivership through?
That's a good question. I think that, for me, when the superintendent decided to leave Providence, I had to start thinking about what my next move would be. In the last sort of 5 or 6, I think I said, I don't know how many numbers, but we've had a lot of change every 3 to 4 years of superintendents, and almost every time that change has happened, the chief academic officer has also left, not necessarily with the superintendent and not for the same reason, but every time that there's been a change, that chief academic officer position has also changed. So I started thinking that I need to be thinking about what my next move would be and what I want my career path to be. So I applied for the interim superintendent position in Providence, and I did not get that position. They brought in the superintendent from Central Falls, who is a retired superintendent from Central Falls, who I really respect and admire and have learned a lot from even in the last 6 months. But during that time, I had been thinking, okay, what am I going to do? And I aspire to be a superintendent. That's why I'm standing here today. I think I'm a really good fit for Everett, but I understand the concerns, and I think they're fair, and I think it's better to put them on the table now than to have to deal with them later. So I started looking. I don't want to move my family more than one more time. So I believe that, I coach, maybe you mentioned this, I don't know, but I coach their hockey team. They play on 2 different hockey teams. I am a family person. I believe in the consistency that is needed for families, and I believe that we provide that for our children. And I know that moving and change can be disruptive. I also know that my mom was a military brat and moved around the country, so it's also something that can be done. But I don't want to move around. So I told the folks at the first interview that I had, if I was offered a 10-year contract, I would take a 10-year contract, because that's how long I want to be somewhere, or at least. I know I'm not going to get a 10-year wouldn't be offered a 10-year contract. I understand the concerns with that, but that I want to be in a district for 10 years or longer. I want to be in a place where I can see change through, where I can stay with my family, and where we can be settled. So that's the reason I'm looking now. That's why I'm here in Everett now, and that's my hope for the future for myself and for my family. And I hope to be able to make a difference and make change in Everett. Hello.
So my question is, why do you think we need change in Everett? And do you have any ideas about the types of change?
Yeah. So I think that there are a lot of really good things happening in Everett. I've looked at the progress of all of the schools on the DESE site, sort of looking at the progress that each of the schools have made toward their targets. And I believe that there is an opportunity. To me, this is about opportunity. We're hearing it through the Opportunity Act. You're seeing it in the Opportunity Atlas. To me, this is an opportunity time for Everett, whether it's with me or not. And so I think that there is what I've heard today is that people want to feel like they are trusted and valued, and that their voices are heard, and that they're part of a team that's working together toward a common goal. And that's what I hear, and that's the type of change that I would want to drive. And I believe that because that is in my nature, that's just who I am, that I would be a good fit for that. But if it's not me, I get that too. So I think that's the type of change, that is the type of change I'm talking about. I'm not talking about bringing people in, so I've never been a person who has moved to a principal position or to a central office position, and I've never brought anyone with me. So I believe in building people's skill, building a connection, building a team, and working with that team to improve. And so I think we should, in education, always be looking for improvements, always be looking for change. And to me, the change is about trust. It's about collaboration. It's about team. And that's at least what I'm hearing when I'm from the schools I visited today. That's something that they're hoping for. Thank you.
If I could. Freddie Mercury. So my notes are home, the research. But regarding, I don't know whether it's the receivership or the Department of Justice, but recently haven't you had reached an agreement come to an accord or came into compliance. Didn't something happen recently?
Yeah, so we've recently exited from a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice
Okay.
Around special education services that predated my time there. In DC Public Schools, I was in charge when we exited a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice for special education services.
Okay, so you recently have a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice for which services?
It was for, the school department was running sheltered workshops for students with disabilities.
Okay, so this is something you inherited,
Right.
and you saw it through to the settlement,
Right.
right? So what did you do to get from point A to point B in that situation?
Well, we had to change the program. We had to make sure that students had the availability and the opportunity to have work experiences outside of the school. We had to make sure that our transition planning was appropriate, and we had to make sure that we were tracking students as they exited the schools. So that was about setting up systems and structures and about project managing, and then about really getting it over the finish line. So making sure that we were very organized around how we monitored and reported on the students who were still a part of this settlement agreement.
Was there a timeline associated with that?
Yeah, there's a timeline that so the state is still in the settlement agreement, and we exited the agreement early. And that was really working closely with our special education director, our attorney, the supervisor at the school, and really just staying on top of the deliverables and making sure that we were, number one, creating program for students that was appropriate for them, but also number two, making sure that we were reporting appropriately.
Okay. And you said a similar thing happened in Washington too?
Yes, in Washington, D.C., we also exited a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice around special education. And so that was a big win for the district. The district had been in non-compliance for 30 years or so around special education services, and so that was at the end of my 4-year, 3.5-year of time there, and that was the same thing. That was about making sure that we were tracking, that we created programs. So one of the things that happened when I first came to DC Public Schools was there were 2,500 students who were in out-of-district placements, and the mayor asked us to return a number of those students. And so we had to build programs in the schools that were to be able to support the students who were out in private placements. And so that was really the big work that I came back to do. And people were really nervous about that, but it turned out at the end of that time, our test, with bringing 1,000 students back from private placement, test scores went up, graduation rates went up, and overall the district was improving despite, with the additional influx of students.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for your time. Thank you for participating. Tom, thank you for spending the day here. We'll see you on Saturday. Maybe you want to make a closing statement, and we'll call it a day.
Sure. Yeah, I just would like to thank you all for the direct questions and for spending time with me today and asking me those questions, and for listening and for showing me around today. I was really impressed with the schools that I saw and with the teachers that I met and the students I saw in classes. It's a vibrant and really wonderful community that I would love to be a part of, and I really am humbled for the opportunity to be here, and I thank you for everything that you've done today, Mr. Parker, and for the committee in welcoming me to the community. So thank you very much. Have a great night.